sky. Landed in a field, baby, next to I-35. Well, I don't know what they want, but it might be you and I. Hey, what's going on, folks? This is Moot Davis, and this is another installment in the Moot Point podcast. This time coming to you from my stateroom here on the cruise ship. We just got done opening up the show Million Dollar Quartet here. So yeah, it's been cool, and it's been a little bit of a whirlwind week. Things are finally settling in, and I had a chance to chat with a guy I've known for quite some time. And through being involved with this musical, the Million Dollar Quartet, got to know him a bit better. And yeah, he was gracious enough to sit down and chat with me a little bit. And I'm talking about Chuck Mead. Chuck is well known for co-founding the band BR549. And most recently, he, in the past 10 years, has become the music director for the Million Dollar Quartet. And sort of took it all the way from its inception to Broadway, and now it's becoming a television show and all that good stuff. And yeah, he took a few minutes out to talk to me about the whole thing and about where he's from and his whole journey from the streets of Lower Broadway in Nashville to Broadway in New York City and back again. So I hope you enjoy this. It was a real pleasure getting to talk to him, and yeah, he's just one cool dude. All right, here you go.
Get you all dialed in.
Yeah, man.
Oh, this is pretty comfortable. I could live like this.
Yeah, this isn't terrible at all. It's funny, on the other ship there was about maybe 3 feet more in the room.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you had a little bit more space, but this ain't terrible at all.
And what floor are we on? 7 still?
7. We're on the first half of 7.
Bad.
Yeah.
It's badass. I like it.
Yeah, it's cool. All right, so where are you from originally?
I grew up in Lawrence, Kansas. That's my hometown.
Right.
The home of basketball.
Right. Yeah.
And we know that because the original rules sit there at Allen Fieldhouse now. Uh-huh. So even if you're not a sports fan, you're a Jayhawk basketball fan.
Okay, gotcha. And what did your folks do?
My dad was a school teacher for 35 years. He's a PhD in education, actually.
Okay.
And my mom did a lot of things. Mostly she was a vice president of a bank at one point, and did several banking jobs and accounting jobs. And she was a secretary for grade school for a short period of time, too.
Okay.
And I grew up, it was okay. It was,
yeah.
We weren't poor, but we weren't rich, and lived out in the country, and
yeah, it
was all right.
Cool. And you got brothers and sisters? Or?
I have a sister. I have one sister.
Okay.
Younger.
Right. Okay, cool.
Yeah. And
now, did either of your folks do music at all, or?
Well, actually, my mother's family, they were really musical. In the 40s, late 40s, early 50s, she's from Nevada, Missouri, southwest Missouri, just north of Joplin. Mm-hmm. And my mom and my grandpa and grandma, my 2 uncles on that side of the family, they were on the radio. They had a radio show on KNEM in Nevada, Missouri, and
right.
They were part of a thing called the Hayloft Gang.
Okay.
And they were the Wines family, and they did old country, hillbilly songs and Western songs and gospel. So I grew up playing in my folks' band.
Okay.
And they kind of stopped playing for a number of years, and they had kids, and went to high school and had kids, and they stopped doing that. But then, in the late 60s, early 70s, they started playing dances for,
right.
They started getting back into it. And when I was 12 years old, I got a drum kit, and I was now the drummer.
Okay.
And it was my mom and my dad played bass, and I actually had to teach my dad to play bass because
right.
There was a guy they had in before, but it kept switching around. Sometimes he couldn't play gigs, so they wanted somebody in the family they could depend on.
Yeah.
So I taught my dad how to play bass, but my mom played piano and sang, and my uncle played lead guitar, my grandpa played rhythm guitar.
Right.
My dad played bass, and so every Friday and Saturday night from the time I was 12 until I was 17,
yeah,
I had gigs.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I had money in junior high.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Nice.
got to see grown-ups drunk.
Right.
And we'd play Eagles and Elks and Knights of Columbus and, those kind of moose clubs, the antler circuit.
Yeah, sure.
But we'd also play like some honky tonks and stuff. We
had
a great time, I still play some of the same songs that we played back then.
Right. That's awesome, but that's cool that you sort of grew up into it. Like where you were out playing with your actual family members. Because I think my folks, my dad had a band with his brothers, and they wrote their own songs, which was the big thing that I took from it. And they had some cool things, but they never went anywhere outside of the basement. They just would get together and play a couple songs, and then everybody fight, and then they split up.
Of course.
But that must be a unique thing to have.
Well, I learned a skill set.
Yeah.
I learned that. I learned that you still make $500 on a gig.
Right.
And that's on a good night.
Right. Yeah.
And that was back in the 70s. But then I kind of morphed it in, I wanted to play more rock. I was the guy that played the Chuck Berry and the Elvis and the Carl Perkins. I was the young kid that played, the up numbers.
Yeah.
Proud Mary.
Yeah.
And but I always did Hank Williams songs. And then I got to be like 18, in high school and everything. And I was 17 or 18. I really got really into like the Ramones and the Sex Pistols and the Clash and the Jam and Nick Lowe and all that kind of stuff, because I just saw it as an extension of the rock and roll that like Chuck Berry and Elvis and Carl Perkins and all that.
Yeah, sure.
And I was into the AM radio stuff too that was out in the 70s. The wide variety of different kind of things that you would hear on the radio that you don't hear anymore together.
Right.
Like you'd hear the Spinners, and then you'd hear, Kenny Rogers.
Right.
And then you hear Black Betty by Ramjet.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right,
it was just all on the same radio station.
Yeah.
And then you'd hear, Buck Owens or whatever.
Right.
It wasn't so specialized. The marketing people hadn't gotten to radio so much yet.
Right, sure.
So, I kind of liked all music.
Yeah.
But, and that was really, I was into Bruce Springsteen and stuff too. Because I thought that was like old rock and roll.
Yeah, totally. Cool. And then, would you say it's safe to say that, like, the things that you're most well known for are like the BR5 stuff, and then sort of moving on to being like the musical director of this Million Dollar Quartet stuff, or is that fair?
Yeah,
or not real?
Yeah.
Okay.
To be in BR549 and and I go out, I make my own records and stuff too.
Right.
I got a solo career, but then being the musical director for this was like sort of a godsend, because it was kind of a step into a different kind of show business than I was used to. I mean,
sure.
Theater is totally different from the music business.
Right.
They pay you for one thing.
Right. But outside of that, like, was it hard to sort of make the switch, or was it?
No, it really wasn't, because I'd never done it when I got the gig. I'd never done it, and so I just kind of treated it like I was producing a record.
Right.
And because that was my only point of reference, and of course I learned a lot as it went along, but still basically it's the same thing.
Right.
You've seen it. We produce a record.
Yeah.
I produce the same record with a different bunch of people.
Right.
Every time.
Yeah.
And it's and to play the songs live like you're recording it, that's the whole idea.
Yeah.
But keep it live with a spontaneous urgency and illusion of spontaneity.
Right.
That's there is still some spontaneous stuff that happens in the show.
Yeah, sure.
But mostly it's the same.
Yeah.
But you got to find something different in the same.
Right. And getting back to like the BR5 stuff, can you talk about like how you formed the band and then what it was like? Because you guys you were on Lower Broad, right? And you it hit, and it just, you guys got a big deal, and like it was like a whole thing that happened, that doesn't happen to just anybody.
No, so you couldn't make it up, because
you
know, I thought it was the last stop. You know, I went down there because I wanted to work at Tootsie's Orchid Lounge.
Okay.
And back when I showed up in Nashville on that street, you know, it was just a bunch of homeless transient people
right.
and European tourists, and
right.
you know, there were, you know, it was a place where songwriters used to be. You know,
right.
Tootsie's Orchid Lounge was a place where, you know, Roger Miller and Willie Nelson and, you know, Hank Cochran and all those guys, Chris Christopherson, they hung out there.
Yeah.
And of course the Opry across the alley when it was there. And it was very romantic to me. And I would, you know, over the years I would be coming through Nashville and I would always go, man, this is where I want to do. So when I finally moved to Nashville, that was my goal, was to get a gig at Tootsie's Orchid Lounge, and I did.
Right.
And BR549, we didn't form the band. It kind of formed itself.
Uh-huh.
It was so weird that you, like I said, you couldn't make it up because Gary Bennett showed up down there on the street about the same time I did.
Right.
In 1993. And Robert, who ran Tootsie's for years and years.
Okay.
You know, I'm not going to get into the street politics, but
right.
suddenly he didn't run it anymore, and some
right.
other people ran it. And so to compete with Tootsie's Orchid Lounge, he had a Western wear store 3 doors down.
Yeah.
And he just put a bar in because it was all just beer back then. There were no drinks. It was just all tavern. And so it wasn't that hard to get a beer license. And he just put a bar in there and a little stage in the front. And he'd have clothes there in the daytime, and you'd pull the clothes off, and it was a stage, you know,
yeah.
at night. And then pretty soon he started having pickers there from 10 a.m. just like the rest of the honky-tonks down there.
Yeah.
There wasn't as many honky-tonks as there are now.
Right.
There was just a few of them. And the other side of the street was the tougher side of the street, you know,
yeah.
the Turf and
yeah.
the Music City Lounge and the Say Win 2.
Right.
That means there's 2 Say Wins.
Right.
Say Win 2. Or the General Lee.
Yeah.
Which is what that was called. But anyway, so Gary and I showed up down there about the same time, and I was playing down there at Tootsie's.
Okay.
And Robert had formed a band for Gary on the weekends.
Okay.
You know, on Friday and Saturday night, he'd play with a band because there were no bands down there, really. Celinda Pink had a band on the other side of the street.
Mm-hmm.
And on the Turf, and I think there was a few other people. But on the country side of the street,
yeah,
it was just a guy in the window.
Yeah.
Or a woman in the window playing some of their own music, but mostly country covers. 5-hour shifts back then.
Nice.
But people took breaks back then.
Yeah.
You know. But anyway, so one night, Gary came down and said, hey, this guitar player guy, you know, because we were the young guys on the street. We're the new guys on the street. And people were kind of noticing because back then it was stuck in the outlaw country era. Right. You know, people were playing a lot of David Allan Coe and Waylon and Willie and, you know, all the stuff from 70s and 80s, you know, that was pretty, and every now and again a Hank Williams song. But, you know, Gary and I both came down there playing Charlie Pride and Johnny Horton and Ray Price and, you know, stuff that people hadn't heard for a long time. And I was playing some rockabilly stuff.
Yeah.
And he came down one night and said, you know, the guy that's supposed to be playing guitar this weekend can't make it. Can you play lead guitar? And I'm like, well, I don't really play lead guitar per se, but yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And it came off great the very first night, him and me singing together. It was just like, it really, really clicked. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
We both kind of freaked us out a little bit. Just like, you know, we didn't want to be in a band with another guy. We were going to be lead guys.
Yeah,
you know? It was just sort of a temporary thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there was never a time when we didn't play our own music, play original songs during that time.
Yeah.
And it was just, you know, Bones Becker was playing bass. He had him, and there was somebody else playing drums. And so it was just like a 4-piece. And then at the end of the gig, we were like, yeah, I'm pretty excited. And he goes, you want to come back, you know, next weekend? And I'm like, well, yeah. You know, that other guitar player was out of a gig, right? It was good.
Yeah.
And then, you know, that very night, some guy comes up to me and goes, hi, I'm Mark Udy, and I'm gonna be playing with you next weekend. You know, because Robert did all the hiring. It wasn't our choice. We're like, oh, really? What do you play? And he goes, I play saxophone. I'm like, saxophone? It's a fucking hillbilly band, man.
Right.
So we had a saxophone player for a while and a rotating drummer.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when, you know, back in Lawrence, Shaw Wilson, who was the drummer in BR549, he and I had a band called Dos Cajones.
Right.
It was drums and guitar, you know. It was like the White Stripes before the White Stripes.
Right.
And it was sort of rockabilly and country.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, you know, Clovis, man, you got to come down. It's a freak show every night.
Yeah.
It's right up your alley. You would love it. And you play music, you know, we were playing, you know, I was working at Tootsie's and Roberts by then. You know, that was a full week of work.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to have a job. which is great.
Yeah.
And so Clovis came down that summer. Shaw came down that summer of '94, and it was great. People were coming down. They were building the arena. They were just starting to construction on the arena. So there was a bunch of those construction guys that would come in and get all drunk and throw tips at you.
Yeah.
And that was when we noticed that when you took a break at midnight, the place cleared out.
Right.
Like, especially on a weeknight. And so we just started, like, not having breaks.
Yeah. Because
we wanted to keep people in the place. We just stopped taking breaks. Yeah. And it just kept building and building. It was crazy, And by October, we were thinking, okay, it's going to be over because the tourists are going to be gone. But then, like, local people started showing up down there. Right. And, people were coming down for the first time in a long time that had never even considered playing lower brow. Because I remember one time we played a Tootsie's Orchid Lounge gig, and I had a Bluebird gig later that night. It was like on a Sunday. Right. And I played my regular Sunday slot, Sean and I did. And then we went and played at the Bluebird, and I mentioned from the Bluebird stage that, we just got off of our gig down at Tootsie's Orchid Lounge on Lower Broadway. And I mean, literally, there was a gasp of fear just hearing it, because people were just from Green Hills, I'm not going to go down there, Right. That's where all, weird stuff happens. And that's why I went down there, because weird stuff happens. And I wish I'd have kept a journal, because there's so many things that I've forgotten, I'm sure. Yeah. And Jay McDowell was hanging out down there. All right. Who eventually became Smilin' Jay, was the bass player. And he was in a band called Hellbilly. It was like this sort of psychobilly, rockabilly band. Yeah. Guitar player. He was just down there drinking and hanging out with us, and he became our friend. Right. And, it kind of time went on, and Donnie Heron, who eventually became BR's utility guy and fiddle player extraordinaire, was roommates with Gary. Okay. And they had known each other from up where Gary came from, up in Portland, Oregon area. Right. Okay. And Donnie was living up there for a while, so they kind of knew each other. And Donnie was playing in some band called Southern Explosion. And he was, out playing that kind of stuff. Out there. And but it just kept going good. And Robert, unlike any other club owner I've ever dealt with, instead of the profits from the more crowds showing up, instead of the profits going up his nose or something like that, he improved the bar. We would still have to take the clothes off the stage and the saddles, but pretty soon that stuff kind of disappeared, and then there was a bigger stage one time, and then we kicked the sax player out because we just couldn't deal with it anymore. But it was cool because we turned him on to Louis Jordan. So, because we wanted to play a little bit of that jump blues stuff too, totally. Which is prototype rockabilly, with a country twang, it just kept morphing. We had him out, and we were just a 4-piece, and then I remember we got a gig opening up for Nick Lowe at 328 Performance Hall. Somehow, I don't know, the guy, West, the promoter of the show, he hired us to do it because we were starting to gain local notoriety. Right. Still no, bigwigs were approaching us about a record deal. Little did we know, though, that there was managers and lawyers and shit that were coming down to see us the whole time. Because there was obviously something going on. Right. And I remember that was the night that we asked Jay to be the bass player, because Bones wouldn't get a doghouse bass. We wanted an upright bass. Right. And Donnie said, if you guys get an upright bass, I'll quit that other band. I'll join the band. You can just hear him saying it. You guys, I'll do that. Yeah. And so we're like, Jay, you need to get you an upright bass, man. Yeah. Get a doghouse, play with us, be the bass player. Yeah. And so he called the next day and said, okay, I'll do it. And so on Wednesday, we drove all the way to Knoxville to get this Englehart upright bass because it was a good price. Mm-hmm. Drove all the way there and drove all the way back. And by the next Monday, he was playing at Tootsie's with Shaw and me. Right. And the first night that he played, it was fucking packed in the place. And Joe Ely was there, and something was going on at the rhyme. And it's his first time ever playing bass in front of people. And it was great. Yeah. It was really, really great. Yeah. And so then and everybody was saying, you guys are making a big mistake Bones is a good bass player. And it's like, well, we wanted the upright bass. You know?
Yeah.
So we played as a 4-piece for a while, but then Donnie, good to his word,
Yeah.
said, okay, I'll do it.
Yeah.
I'll come down, man.
Yeah.
And so then he joined the band on April 1st, 1995. That was the first time that all 5 of the, you know, what became BR.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of grew, and you couldn't make it up. And
right.
all these people were coming to see us. We didn't know they were label people. And,
yeah, sure.
And there were some managers that came down to see us, and then suddenly, you know.
Yeah.
We have a production deal out at the castle, and we had to make this little EP we record live down there, and then next thing we know, we have an Arista contract.
And what was that like for you? Like, what was that like as like a songwriter and, you know, just a musician, sort of coming from doing the family band stuff to, you know, sort of moving and...
Well, I always wanted to, that's what I always wanted to do.
Yeah.
I always wanted to play music for a living.
Yeah.
But I didn't think, you know, I thought I was too old. I thought, well, you know, maybe I'll learn how to write songs and play country music for real down here. Mm-hmm. You know, but still in the back of my head, I thought, you know, that's what I want to do. I've always wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And it just happened.
Yeah.
And, you know, because we sat up there and were ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
They weren't used to that.
Yeah.
That was refreshing to people just being themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and the next thing I know, I'm trying to explain to a German DJ what BR549 means. Because we're traveling all around the world, you know, and the next thing Bob Dylan's calling and saying, hey, you want to join, you want to come be on a tour with...
Yeah.
I'm like, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
You know, of course I want to be on tour with Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
And the Black Crowes, you know.
Yeah.
It was like, it was weird there because for a while we would play a show with George Jones, and then we'd play a few shows with Tim McGraw and Faith Hill.
Right.
Or, you know, someone like that.
Yeah.
And then we'd be on tour for, you know, 2 months with the Black Crowes.
Yeah.
You know, and then we did a whole month and a half with Bob Dylan, and, you know, we just hit the road and playing all these festivals and play with a lot of different people. And it was really great, you know. We sold a few records.
Yeah.
We did all right.
Yeah. No, when I first, my parents had this, like, habit of, we had a swimming pool at our house, and in the summers, you know, they would want it drained. They never bought a cover for it, so come like every spring, it would have to be drained of all the shitty water, and then somebody would have to get in there and scrub it.
Sure.
So that was my job, you know,
course.
as soon as I got off school. And so I'm in there scrubbing it, and I remember I had the Telephone album, the BR Telephone.
Right.
And I would just sort of listen to it over and over again as I'm scrubbing this huge concrete pool, you know, in our backyard. And then I remember when I moved to town, I talked to Andy Gibson and stuff, and he was like, "Oh yeah, man, they're like, you know, riding around in that big Jack Daniels tour bus and all this shit." It just seemed like otherworldly to me, like, you know, like.
It seemed otherworldly to me too.
Right. Yeah. That's wild.
Andy Gibson, Asleep at the Steel.
Yeah.
I love that guy.
Man, he's a sweetheart.
He's a great musician.
Yeah. He's cool. That's awesome. And I think I've asked you this before, but, you know, sort of just in passing and in private, like if you've you know, when you were doing all this other sort of music stuff, if you ever foresaw any kind of this MDQ, Million Dollar Quartet sort of music director thing happening.
I didn't know. It took me completely by surprise. I never thought about it. What happened was, you know, when Gary and Jay kind of bowed out of the band in 2001, the next year, Donnie and Shaw and I kind of got together, and, you know, we got Chris Scruggs in there, and eventually Mark Miller, too.
Yeah.
And we took that out as BR549 Mach 2 or whatever.
Right.
And we got a record deal with some guys that formed a label called Dual Tone Records.
Right.
That were guys that we worked with at Arista. They had kind of, you know, when Arista got kind of folded in to, you know, BMG and RCA and all that, just, you know, when the label started, you know, to be together all just one big label because the music business was changing because of Napster and free downloads and all that. We went out and did that for a while, and then Bob called Donnie to be in his band, and so that was that.
Yeah.
You know, for BR, we're like, well, I guess it's time to do something else. And I got a songwriting gig, and I just hung around the house.
Yeah.
You know, for like 2 years, I had a publishing deal.
Right.
with our old manager, BR's old manager, Barry Coburn, over at 1010.
Right.
And, I wrote a lot of songs with a lot of people and learned a lot. I got hooked in with Guy Clark, which was great. I guess that was a little before, because we did a record that had a Guy Clark song that he and I wrote together.
Yeah.
On that last BR record called Lower Broad Street Blues, because we ran across him over the years.
Right.
And I remember we played with him in Michigan one time, and he came up, and because we knew the version of In the Jailhouse Now, the Johnny Cash version that had a whole bunch of different words to it.
Right.
And he's like, I know that version, and would come up and sing it with us, And anyway, so I had that songwriting deal, and I was just thinking, well, I guess I have to develop this, because I don't have the band anymore. I'm just gonna have to do something on my own. And then I got a call one day. Colin Escott, great music writer, who had written like the definitive Hank Williams biography and Sun Records biography and tons of liner notes. He'd been working with my wife, who was the curator of the Grand Ole Opry Museum, and took care of all the history and licensed photographs and stuff. And he was working with her on something. And he's like, do you think Chuck would be interested in working in musical theater? And she's like, well, you'll have to call him. Yeah. So he called me up, and he's like, you ever thought about working in musical theater? I'm like, not really. Why? And he's like, well, I wrote this treatment where, it's about the Million Dollar Quartet. And I'm like, well, I know that music. Yeah. So he sent me the script, one of the early on scripts. And they had a reading up in Issaquah, Washington. And, I said, well, sure, I'd be really interested in it. So he had me meet with a couple of the producers, and I got sussed out. One of them was not too much for me because I didn't read music. They didn't. Right. They wanted it to be real rockabilly instead of like a musical director, Broadway musical director guy. His vision of Broadway, or her vision of Broadway, which usually you put your thumbs in your pockets and everything's up to date in Kansas City. They don't really know shit about rockabilly music. And so, God bless John Cassette, who is one of the main producers in it, and also owned the Grammy show, and spent a lot of time in real rock and roll. Yeah. He vibed me and said, no, we need this guy. Yeah. And Colin was, pushing for me too, so they gave me the gig, the first working production of it in Daytona Beach, and that was in 2006. Wow. So I've been doing this for 10 years. Yeah. And I got there, I didn't even have an iPod. They were doing a script read. Yeah. And I was like, had a boom box, and I was putting CDs in it, Oh, it's time for Matchbox now, Yeah. And some of the songs were different and everything. But we got in there, and I put it together, and I had Brandon Giles was playing, from down there on Lower Broad. I said, we need this guy, and there was another guy, Nick Willett, who's like an Elvis guy, so we need him too, and then Lance Guest, who eventually went on to be Johnny Cash on Broadway and everything, and Rob Lyons, who played Carl Perkins up until last week, when they closed in Vegas. He did it for 10 years, and I just put together the band, we just had band practice. They didn't know what I was doing. It looked like nothing was getting done. Right. And at first they had, they just had hired a guy to play bass. Right. The drummer's usually okay. A theater drummer is usually okay because they usually have a jazz background, and they're not big rock hitters, which lends it to rock and roll. Yeah. This kind of rock and roll, rockabilly. Right. And, but the bass player, he had no clue how to slap a bass. Right. Oh, but he majored in upright bass in college. No, he didn't major in hillbilly music. Right. Yeah. And so, like, I had to say, I had to go to these theater people, and I didn't know at the time. Like, we got to get rid of that guy. He's lame. Yeah. It's going to make the show lame if we don't. They're freaking out because equity and blah blah. They're all freaked out. Is he going to? Are you sure you want to? Yeah. So I just Google Orlando rockabilly. Yeah. And up comes this band called the Rocket 88s, and the bass player is a guy named Chuck Zayas. And he eventually became the bass player in many incarnations of this. He was the first guy, and he came in, and immediately, he knew all the songs already, and it was just our arrangements, and immediately they knew that I knew what I was talking about.
Right.
And so it went off really great, and it became a great production, and then we went and did it in Issaquah, Washington the next year.
Yeah.
And then in 2008, we took it to Chicago, and it ran for 8 years in Chicago.
Wow.
Which is the longest running musical in Chicago history that came out of there. And then we went to Broadway, and then we went to West End, and then there was a tour, and it's everywhere now.
Yeah, totally.
And so I learned a lot.
Yeah, sure.
I really learned a lot how to put music into a longer narrative that's not like, a pretentious, I don't know, I shouldn't say pretentious. It's like making a concept record. Like, I can totally see how they made a musical out of Tommy now.
Right.
And I love that. That's probably the first, real true rock opera concept, conceptual record where the songs all kind of tell a big story. But you can pull the songs out of it and they still are cool songs.
Yeah.
And so I learned about that.
Right.
And that's good, being in a different kind of show business. And I never thought I'd be there.
Yeah.
And now I'm doing the TV show. Now, that's a different thing yet.
Yeah.
So, being in a retarded hillbilly band's let me, I still don't have a job after all these years. It's great.
That's awesome, man. You must be really, sort of proud. I mean, it's big,
Well, yeah, but I like to keep my chops up. I'm putting out my own records and trying to writing songs on my own and everything. And I'd love to. I have a great idea for a musical, and I really want to put all that together. But find time in between all this other shit that I'm doing with Million Dollar Quartet to write. I'd like to take like a month or two off and just finish all these songs. Yeah. But and still hang out with my songwriting buddies.
Yeah.
Be a regular Nashville guy.
Right. Right. Well, cool. I don't want to keep you too long, but I just want to ask you like one more question about what are your sort of thoughts? You mentioned earlier about how the business is changing, meaning the record business, with like digital downloads and things like that.
Right.
So what
streaming?
Right. I mean, so how do you think it's going to work? I mean, because is it working now? It doesn't seem to be to me. I mean, it doesn't.
Well, it didn't work like it used to.
Yeah.
I think eventually they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But I'm too dumb for that.
Yeah.
But on one hand, it's like you can't run it like it did, and because you don't sell records. People really don't sell. They sell actual vinyl.
Right.
But that's still just a fraction of
what
the business.
Yeah.
And people don't make money that much off of streaming. It's like, Blockbuster. It's like renting a song, really.
Right.
And so the business has suffered. The good thing is that, the do-it-yourself people can really do it themselves. You can make a record in your basement and make it sound like it's a great studio.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's good and it's bad. It's good because people have the freedom to do exactly what they want without A&R people doing it. But the bad part is that people have the freedom to do what they want, and there's no A&R people to go, really, that you should
Yeah.
There was a mentor and a guidance thing that went along with some of these record people. The people that were in the record business in the old days didn't graduate from Belmont to learn how to be a music biz person. They were like into music.
Yeah.
And it was a way for them to get into shows for free and hang around musicians, and they're interested in it, and they want to help create that and guide people, and
Yeah.
There's not going to be really any great figures. I don't know. Maybe there is. Maybe I'm wrong. But there's not going to be any great, Erdigans or people like that anymore to have a vision, because you can't sell. People don't buy the physical product.
Right.
Yeah. They'll buy a T-shirt before they buy a CD.
Yeah.
Younger people, I guess. I don't know.
Right.
Or they'll buy, but the vinyl stuff. I mean, there's some people that are hooked onto that. But
yeah.
I don't know. It's just a weird time. I mean, they're just going to have to figure it out. And I think I was part of the last wave of people that really benefited from having a huge
Yeah.
record deal.
Yeah.
We sold about 500,000 records on their first record.
Yeah.
And we were wondering if we were going to get signed again.
Right.
Now, if we sold that many, they'd be like shitting in high cotton.
Yeah.
34,000 copies that's a number one record now.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a bizarre time for the music business.
Yeah,
sure.
Somebody will figure it out. They always figure out a way, to screw the musicians.
Right,
and
right.
make money.
Right.
But, Garth Brooks and the Beatles, they all got screwed. I mean, they made a bunch of money.
Right.
But, they gave away millions
Yeah.
because that's just the way the deals were set up. You're an indentured servant.
Right.
To a label.
Yeah.
And now you're not so married to that. You can have your own label, and if you have distribution, you can put it on iTunes, and people will still steal it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the main thing is if you generate a following live, like the Avett Brothers, that's a perfect example because that was all grassroots. They came up playing house parties, and they were in punk rock bands, and the cops would always come, so they started playing banjos and acoustic guitars and upright bass at a house party, and they garnered a bunch of people, and their crowd kept building and building. They put out independent records on 30 Tigers, and the next thing they're working with Rick Rubin, and they got major label deal, and they play arenas and stuff.
Right.
That's a do-it-yourself success story. Post huge music business form, but that all comes from playing live.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the answer. You have to really you can't just like be Steely Dan anymore.
Oh no. Yeah, I think the road's always been a big part of it. So.
Well, yeah, but now if you sign with a major label, they have that 360 deal. Where it's your publishing, your T-shirts. It's everything. It's like, no, T-shirts were mine.
Yeah.
Back in the day, you have all that other shit, not the publishing, but you're making money off all the records.
Right.
Let me make my T-shirt money.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know. They'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Somebody will figure it out.
Yeah.
I don't give a fuck. I'm 56.
Right.
I'm just gonna keep slogging it out there, playing my little Chitlin circuit gigs, and come back and do these shows. Try to do something creative.
Yeah. Totally. Well, cool, man, and I want to thank you also for letting me be in the show.
Are you kidding me? You do great, man.
Cool.
You do great. It's being on stage like that. You had to kind of drop any sort of inhibitions. You just have to kind of not worry about what people think of you and soak into it.
Yeah.
And that's not a lot of people could adapt to that, and you did a great job at it.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
Damn good, Sam Phillips. Well, you know what you're talking about, too.
Right.
That helps.
Yeah.
Some of these guys that play Sam Phillips have to study up on it, but
Sure.
you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Well, I really appreciate it. So thanks.
No problem. It's my pleasure, Moot.
Cool, buddy. Cool.
From rags to rhinestones, renting rooms to mansion homes, riding long shotty cars instead of walking alone.
All right, folks. That was my interview with the good old Chuck Mead. I hope you enjoyed it. In other news, if you need to reach me, I will be here on the Norwegian Getaway until sometime in mid-May 2017. So I will be on the high seas. And I think we got one or two more podcasts that I'm going to release before the year is out. So please keep an ear out for them. And if you want to check out more info on Chuck Mead, check out chuckmead.com, and you'll get your fill over there. Anyway, want to thank him once again for taking the time to chat with me, and I hope everybody's doing well here in December. All right, you all be cool, and I'll talk to you next time. Later.
Traveling down that lonesome highway, walking on my own. I got a smile rusted sign.